Hi, the episode is coming at you in just a minute. I just wanted to take a second to let you know that if you can, leave a 5-star review or follow us on your podcast platform of choice. That really helps the podcast and allows us to continue to provide a platform for independent musicians in Berlin. And it helps provide you, the listener, with more insights and experiences and advice from independent musicians that are living off music and making their way in the independent music scene here in Berlin and in Europe. Thank you very much, and I'll leave you to listen to the episode. Thank you. So I'll clap and then you do one. Cool, perfect. Welcome back to Unsigned Berlin. I'm sat here today with Garey Godson, and we're going to get into it just after a little snippet of your latest single, Let Me In.
Hope you gonna let me in. Say you gonna let me in. Say you gonna let me in. Say you gonna let me in. Hope you gonna let me in.
And that was Let Me In. When you started out, you were in Wari, I'm hoping pronunciation.
Yeah, I grew up in Warri, so like that's my hometown, Warri, Nigeria.
And did you start producing that when you were kind of like 19 and doing vocal takes and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I started when I was 16, 17. I was mostly focused on producing, writing songs for other artists. It was a fascination for me, the whole idea of being able to make a record from nothing, from scratch. It was a new fascination. A buddy of mine showed me FL Studio, and that became my new best friend. I was spending so many hours just trying to navigate the software, understand how it worked. And there was a neighborhood producer called Robotic Man who introduced me into production properly.
Right.
So laying vocals, how a record should sound, in terms of like mixing and mastering, like really going deep into the music itself.
Yeah. Do you remember the first like album or song or any event that made you realize that like making music is also an option as something to do? Does that make sense instead of just like listening?
For me, it was Kanye West, like when the College Dropout album came out, and I did a bit of research about Kanye. Then it was MTV. MTV Base was like the research we had. So MTV Base is a version of MTV, but MTV Base is just for Africa, like West African regions. And we used to be very exposed to like the Western culture, primarily American music videos. And when Kanye came out, and I saw that he was producing his records and like sampling and chopping up and like recordings and all of that, I was very fascinated about, producing and putting out records. Also, him being a producer and an artist, that wasn't a concept that I had seen before. That was fairly new to me, and I found it pretty interesting and inspiring.
Was that also one of your first interactions with hip hop, or was that kind of in your life before that?
It was hip hop. Like my first introduction into the thought of being an artist, either as a producer or as a recording artist, was hip hop. I had a cousin. He was older, about like 10 years older. And when he noticed that I was like really loving the hip hop music and the hip hop records, he used to bring CDs to me. Like every time he would visit, it would be a new CD. It would be DMX or Ja Rule or 50 Cent. It was always something new. Also the classics like the Lox, Jada Kiss, Tupac, B.I.G. So I was exposed to hip hop music primarily. That kind of like opened the door to production, because back then hip hop was the thing, for us in Nigeria, hip hop was the thing. It wasn't until in the late 2000s that Afro beats and Nigerian music became like predominantly what we listen to in Nigeria and then in the continent.
Does that play into why you moved as well, or were you moving more for studying? Because you moved in 2016, right, to study media and communication?
Yeah, I moved for my master's in media and communication science. I graduated. I wanted to leave the shores of Nigeria. I wanted to experience something else. And media and communication science is what brought me to Germany. I did my master's and decided to stay back for a few years to just explore and see what, Germany holds for me.
When you did do that move, were you already thinking about music as a career, or was it kind of like just something you were doing for fun?
It's always been something I've done along whatever else I was doing. So while I was studying over in Nigeria for my bachelor's, I was doing music. During internships, I've always had a studio. I've always had a place I can fall back to in terms of like creativity or just bounce ideas or just always create. So it's always been something since I can remember, already from like 15, 16.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then not so long after moving to Germany, you started indie label Room of Understanding.
Yeah.
What was the idea with that?
So it was back in Ilmenau where I studied. It was a small city in the east of Germany. And we had a creative community of artists, producers. It was HKMK and I who started. We're missing having a collective where we could just be free to create.
Right.
It was everybody doing their different things. So we created the Room of Understanding as a center hub for us to create, express ourselves. It was an actual room, 16 square meter, or definitely less than 20.
Yeah.
Hannes's room, we used to make beats there, mix records, and we just thought, this place is the Room of Understanding because we bounce ideas here and we always find a way to make it happen. So Left Lucas was one of the artists who later joined us. We had Cryptic, a producer who was also working very closely with us. Matun Pasud, Bratawan, who's an incredibly dope photographer. So it was a creative collective with everything, where we had a photographer, producer, a cinematographer, and then someone who was mixing and mastering, which was Hannes and I.
Right.
Yeah.
And then since moving to Berlin, what's happened with Room of Understanding?
The Room of Understanding is still there.
Right.
We've just in the last, say, 2 years I've had like different places we want to go with our career, but we still work very closely together.
Nice.
And I would say that the concept of the Room of Understanding hasn't paused. HKMK and I, Hannes, we're still working very closely together.
Yeah.
But we're just giving it time to grow back organically again, so it's still very much there.
Nice.
Yeah.
You and Hannes have worked on a lot of stuff together. Do you think what's the difference you see between the way you two work together and working with other producers?
That's a very interesting question. So the relationship that Hannes and I created, the foundation of it was friendship, first of all. It was like talking about music. I introduced him to production and then he ran with it like with the German force. So our foundation was built on friendship, and then we discovered what we could do creatively together. So we spent a lot of time trying to understand each other. So there's a friendship link there. It's kind of different when you're working with other people, because a lot of times it's just business. It's just you want to create something and you want to get it out.
Yeah.
But we worked together as a team. We grew together. Like my first couple of songs, Hannes and I, we released them together. All of my catalog has been heavily involved in it in one way or the other. Either we co-produce, or he produces, or he mixes and masters, or I mix and then we master together. So he's creatively infused in my work. It's, it just fits nicely.
How do you feel like that's working with him has affected your sound compared to what you were doing before?
I think we have grown to create a sound together. I wouldn't really say affected. Really depends on how you see it, but I rather think of it as we've evolved together as, a creative link. When we work on records together, we've created some core understanding that helps us know what direction it's going. We don't rush records. We find with taking a break and coming back to listen to it again. We're also patient to getting what we want for a record. So if we have to get someone to play guitar or some extra backing vocals, and that's going to hesitate us from putting out the record as quickly as we thought, we will need to go through that creative process, because that's where diamond comes from. That's where beautiful records come from. It's not just about getting things rushed out, but really about the journey of refining your sound, getting deeper into the music, adding the necessary tweaks, incorporating live instrumentalist or extra vocals when needed. Yeah.
What's the songwriting process like with you two, if you're working together or if you're working with other people? Is it typically like you're coming in with an idea, you're like, this is what I want to say, how are we going to do that? Or is it more improvising? What's that like?
It depends. So many of my songs, I write them alone.
I hear an instrumental, I really like it. Many of my materials I've recorded in the comfort of my home or either at Hannes' studio back then when we were still studying together. If I hear an instrumental I like, just in the very few seconds of hearing it, 15 to 30 seconds, sometimes I get the core idea of what the song is going to be.
Okay.
Sometimes it takes longer. You know, I get the lyrics first with the instrumental and then I build it. You know, now it's a very popular style of writing where you don't use the pen and paper. You work with melodies and create top lines and then you build the concept of the song. So that's how I write.
Right.
Yeah.
And you also, I found an article that you wrote talking about your work with Hannes on Finding Forever, which is it was a 4-track EP, and then how the promotion and how everything around it just kind of elevated to Chosen One, which is a single after that. What do you feel like you've learned between that, which was several years ago, to now, where it's like 300x the amount of streams that are coming in and that kind of thing?
Yeah, we were tiptoeing at the beginning. We were like newborn babies trying to learn how to walk, you know, from crawling and double thinking of what it really meant to put out your music. Do you have the rights to it? Like, is everything cleared? Is it safe for us to upload here?
Right.
Like, this was at the very early stages of DistroKid and the other distribution platforms. It was fairly new for us. There weren't a lot of educational materials on what's being independent even meant. I'm talking like 2006 or 15 even. It was a new experiment for us. It was like everything was totally brand new. So compared to now, I would say it's just been a learning experience, a learning curve. You try things, you fail, you learn what could work better, you improve musically as well. And you embrace that improvement too, because one thing I notice is lots of times as artists, you listen to your old work and you feel disappointed.
Yeah.
But you forget that some of your favorite stars also, they have like old works where you can see how they've improved creatively too. So it's good sometimes to just look back at how far you've come as a creative, like go back to your old works to see how you've developed. It shows that there's always room for self-improvement. There's always room to evolve as an artist. There's always room to add like extra layers to your style and further develop. It's like life basically. Yeah.
I mean, obviously the situation's a little different now if someone's in that position where they're kind of like putting out the first songs or anything. But what kind of advice would you give to independent artists that are at that point of their music career now?
I think the first and most important advice would give is have a home studio. Like it's highly underestimated how important that is for the creative process. Because what happens is you are not only able to record whenever you want to record, but you're also able to develop and understand your style as an artist. Like every artist has different ways they approach records. So you want to know how your tonality is. You want to know what your range is. You want to know how your attack is. You want to know how you layer your vocals. And you can only learn that from recording all the time. And also having the flexibility to come back to make touches and edits and like extras on it is super, super important. If you always had to go to a producer to do that, I mean, booking studio time for that, that's extremely expensive. And it just doesn't add up in today's world. That'd be the first advice. Also, I would say it's important to understand the different aspects of the package music. I'm not just talking about making the music or recording alone, but understanding a bit of what promotion entails, knowing what a good photo looks like, understanding what your brand message is, knowing how to edit your videos by yourself. All of this, it goes a long way compared to the early 2000s where everything required very heavy budgets. There's so much you can do by yourself these days. And understanding the different tools and knowing how to wear the different hats when it's needed helps you go a long way.
Yeah.
It's not that you shouldn't pay people to work with them to enhance what you're producing or to enhance your brand, but it's important to know how these different areas of the industry functions, because you can give very concrete advice or concrete recommendation to someone who's doing a cover for you. For instance, you can specifically say, I don't like this because of so colors. These are my brand colors. You can tell a videographer what you don't like about a video in direct specifics in terms of like quality and all of that. And it's easier for them to take your feedback and create what you want.
Mm-hmm.
You pretty much become a creative director, and no one is able to just create things that don't align with your brand. But you're only able to do that if you understand these different areas, not in the 100% fullness of it, but like having the core idea of how it functions, basically.
Yeah. Streamlines communication and makes everything work smoother. Moving while you're doing music as a career, so you were doing the Room of Understanding and you were working on music, and then moved to Berlin. That's really difficult to kind of overcome that and be in a completely new scene, meet all these new people.
Yeah.
What was your experience like with that?
It wasn't easy, to be honest. But like life, when you're moving, when you're doing things, and when you're multitasking in huge ways, you don't really think about it so much, at least for me. Like when I'm really zoned in to working towards achieving something, I'm very zoned in. I hardly look back to check what's happening around me. And that helped me very much in the early years of me making a transition from studying and then moving to a city like Berlin, establishing relationships, doing community work in different areas, doing other things that I love aside from music. That's equally important. Being able to balance all of these things. I think with age and also with, I don't want to sound too old, but with time and with experience, I'm able to balance things better. But there was a time I had this crazy drive to do many things at the same time. I still do several things at the same time, but I know how to organize myself in a better way that it doesn't organize. So in a way that it doesn't disrupt or disorganize me, I meant to say. So it's definitely a crazy road when I think about it, moving to Berlin and just experimenting into the muddy waters of how crazy a city like Berlin can be. But it also helps you find yourself. You learn a lot about your independence. You learn a lot about your capabilities. You learn a lot about how to connect with people and how to give value. And you learn a lot also about what's good for you and what's not good for you. So it's, Yeah.
You mentioned finding community and working on projects that are aside from music. I saw on your Instagram you're associated with Black Aspiring Creators. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and what your role with them is?
Yeah, so Black Aspiring Creators is a creative collective that I started with a very good friend of mine. His name is Phil Apper. We wanted to create a home or a place where creators can converge to share ideas. Like my early years moving to Germany, moving to Berlin specifically, one thing which was missing for me was to see other Black people connect creatively, like having a place where we can bounce ideas, where we can support each other, like a creative network, basically. And I was going to do a fashion, not really a fashion show, but like something to promote my brand combined with music. And my friend Phil is a fashion designer. We talked about it just in the early stages of us knowing each other. And we were planning to do this event. And then the idea sparked for us to make it bigger. We thought, why not include other Black creators in Berlin? Why not expand this to have them come also share their story, share what they are working on, inspire others? And that's what we did. We made what was supposed to be our first event to be bigger, to include other creators. We saw the reception was very positive, and we decided to continue having that every couple of months. And it just grew and grew and grew. It went from 50 to 100 people to 200 to like 500 people, 500 plus we've had at some events. And the community is actively growing. We had last year, if you're listening to this in 2024, our first fashion show with all Black brands. It was open to everyone from different communities. We had over 500 guests. It was a sold out event. It was beautiful. And next year we're thinking of doing bigger, better things. And, just creating a platform to extend beyond just Berlin, but also reaching other places in Europe as well.
And then are you largely organizing those, or are you more on the sort of A&R role side of creatively choosing who's going to be on the runway, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I'm actively involved in the organizing. Yeah, I co-founded it with Phil together.
Yeah.
We have a small team of people who support us for events, who we share ideas with, people who advise us, people who are just there to, give a helping hand in bringing these things to fruition. Because there's no way you can do it on your own. You get to know that very late on, hopefully early for other people who want to go into such endeavors. I'm very hands-on, very involved in getting things like moving. So like actually hands on deck.
Cool.
Yeah.
Where have you been doing them?
Mostly in Berlin.
Like what
most
venue?
of our events. Say that again?
What venue?
We change venues. We've been changing venues. It depends on what type of event we're trying to do.
Right.
We try to make sure that the event is produced in a way that it should be produced. So if we feel like we need to change a venue, we change it. We always make sure that it's produced to how it should be received, basically. Yeah.
What's the difference in organizing, for example, a fashion event versus if it's more music oriented?
It's a huge difference. So with music, I have relationships already in the music industry. So there are people that I can talk to. I know what type of equipment we need. I know where to go. I know how to promote it. I know what type of venues to do. But with something like fashion, for instance, it was the first time we were doing it.
Right.
A lot of research had to go into it. I took a back seat on the presentation of the fashion itself because that's not my area, but my co-founder, Phil, he's a fashion designer himself. So he was able to wear that hat when it was needed. So we know when to trade roles. When it's a music concert, I play the lead role in terms of producing the event. And when it's something else like fashion, for instance, he plays the lead role and then I support him. Yeah.
With booking venues for the music events and trying to find artists and stuff like that, what's your process usually like? Are you booking a venue first, getting a date, and then seeing what can work? Or what's like, which puzzle pieces come in which order?
For me, it's the dream first. If I dream about something, I spend a lot of time just thinking about how the dots should connect.
Yeah.
Sometimes things happen organically. So I might be in a conversation with an artist already. I haven't wanted to do something with them for a while.
Right.
And when the opportunity for me to produce a show arises, it's easy for me to then plug them in. So relationships get activated. Other times, it's a way of building relationships with artists. Like Damidas was recently performing at one of our events we did in 2023. And I had just met him somewhere before. I think it was a week or 2 weeks before. And we talked, we kicked it. We had like a good vibe. I was like, you know what, you should come through. We've also had artists like Law from Austria. He's an incredibly dope rapper, Law Heru. You should check out his music. We've worked together on a few of my projects. He's been like a supporter of BAC from the very conceptual stage. He's someone we call very regularly for our events. Sometimes we feature new faces. We've also had Megalo, who's a German legend, come perform at one of our shows. Once we have those dots lined up for the type of artists we want to have, and we have the concept already laid down, the next thing is just to think of what venues could we potentially use and then reach out to them. And the engineers we've worked with before, they come. Once you've done it a few times, it becomes easier for you to do it.
Right, because you know what it needs.
Exactly.
Yeah. When you're doing the first couple ones, obviously it's an event, so it does bring in money, but money has to go down first. What was your experience like with trying to sort that out in terms of its sponsorship or just trying to find people that are willing to work to make this thing happen?
To be honest, the very first couple of events you do, you should be prepared to know that you could potentially lose money. You have to think of it as a long-term investment. You going into a new field. Music and events have a lot of similarities, but they are quite different. When you are not just a performing artist, but you are putting the whole thing together, you have to learn how that functions. You have to learn how a good show is produced. So, you have to invest your own money into it. For the first couple of months. I'm very sure it's similar to you doing your podcasting with the team, right? You experiment, you see what's working, and then you're able to flip it to make money from it.
Right.
And then you can have a portfolio where you can now have conversations with partners, you know. Right now, we're having bigger conversations with people we could work with in terms of like exposure, organizations that see the vision, who want to tap into it, support it in one way or the other. But you can't go into those conversations if you haven't done the groundwork.
Yeah.
There's nothing to show. You can't just go be like, oh, these are just concepts in my head. And
please give me
can
money.
you give me some money? It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
You need to create a portfolio of things you can show so people can believe. And when you've done that groundwork, sometimes you're not the one who even goes out to look for people to support you. The people already know you.
Right.
Sometimes they reach out themselves. They be like, hey, we see what you're doing. How can we support? So you can't skip the process, basically.
Yeah. I saw on one of your articles that you wrote a series of personal principles that you wrote. This was in like 2017, so a long time.
Wow, you did your research, didn't you?
Yeah. So 7 years ago now.
Wow.
Could we go through each of them? There's 5.
Yeah.
And you talk about, you maybe explain what you were meaning and then see if it's changed in the last 6-7 years.
Good. Why not?
Cool. The first one is first give, then take.
Yes, I think this is a principle that I've been able to live with till date. I feel a lot of times we're always thinking of what can we get from people, but never really what we can give. But when you give naturally, you receive. It's a law of nature, you know. So I try to think of what value I can bring, even just in a conversation, in an exchange. What can I bring to the table before I think of what I could possibly take?
Yeah.
And following that regiment has been good because at the end of the day, you naturally get something in return. You might not realize it immediately, but opening up yourself with the thought that you want to bring something positive into the world, into an encounter, into meeting a person, into a situation, you naturally get something in return. It's the same way I approach my music. I wasn't thinking about money in the first place. I was thinking of how I could put out my creative works to touch someone in one way or the other. Also the same with events I've been organizing for BAC. It's really been about what value can we give? And in return, we get connected to more creators. We're able to now monetize events. We're able to reach more people. We're able to create a network of people who want to support themselves. So it's definitely a principle that I still roll with.
Nice.
Hasn't changed much.
It's actually very similar to my experience. I mean, I haven't been doing it as long as you, but for example, this podcast was started out with the goal of like trying to just give something, trying to give social media content that looks professional, trying to give a platform and all of that. And I definitely obviously thought like, oh, hopefully I can get money for it. But the value that's come back is actually something I'd never thought of, which is the connections to people that you get to meet and the community around that people can get to know each other through it. And
absolutely.
No, that was, I definitely agree with that a lot. The second one is service to support others / spread love in the world.
I think I'm still very that way. It's pretty similar to the first one. It's important for me to see myself in every situation as giving a service, like being a servant with music and with art and like connecting people. It's service to others. And fulfillment comes from that because you have a greater sense of purpose, you know. I've always felt like life isn't just for us alone. As an individual, life isn't just for me alone. And it's something that we have from our training back in Nigeria.
Right.
I would say predominantly most West African countries or Africa, actually, many of us have that sense of wanting to live beyond just ourselves. You know, we want to be able to spread love to others. We want to be able to give and kind of like have a positive impact on others. It hasn't always been to our advantage when I look back historically and its impact on us culturally as a people. I think I'm more aware of when to use that now. With time and with experience, I've been able to know that it's important to filter out when people are just trying to use you.
Right.
I'm very self-aware when it comes to that. I try to pay attention to that, but we're all human, you know?
Yeah.
I think if your intentions are pure, it's not possible for you to always control the outcome or what people make of it. But having those principles guiding you as a person, it goes a long way into how you create your environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. The third one is constantly creating the best version of ourselves.
It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard. It's hard, but I try. I try, you know. I look in the mirror sometimes and I ask myself if I'm better than yesterday. You know, I think I am my competition. I'm not really thinking about competition externally, but what can I do better for myself? You know, like, am I eating better? Am I sleeping better? Is my communication better? Am I having less negative interactions? Is my music better? You know, like, it's important to self-reflect, basically. And I would recommend that to everyone in this world of hustle and bustle. It's good to sometimes take a step back and, you know, really look at what you're putting out in the world. Everything comes from the inside. So if you don't take that into cognizance, you just leaving, but not really leaving, if that makes any sense.
Do you feel like the best, do you feel like your focus has shifted in the last 6 or 7 years since maybe writing this, the best version of yourself you wanted to be as a different person to now? Do you feel like it's changed?
It has changed. It has changed. I feel with every year, it changes. Not drastically, but every year there's an extra layer of things that I want to do and achieve. And I've slowly moved away from this mindset of achieve in the worldly sense, in the, trying to look for a good way to put it. It's beyond just the economical part of it. It's also internally. It's also like more humane. It's also personally. It's also more goal driven in terms of my personality and what I want to be as a person. So the best isn't so much in terms of outward appearance, but it has a lot to do with the inside too, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The fourth is seek first to understand before to be understood. It's a good secret principle.
It's not an easy one either. These are very not easy principles, but they are guiding principles.
Yeah.
And they're important. I try to understand as much as I can. I wouldn't say always, but I try to understand people as much as I can, because many of the issues we're going through in the world today is as a result of miscommunication, and miscommunication leads to impulsiveness. So sometimes taking a step back and trying to really dig deep to see what a person really means by something, either from their body language or from a text or from a reaction, it could save a lot of drama, or it could save a lot of implosion. So I try as much as possible to go a bit deeper than what's being said on the surface to see what's really trying to be said. Like, can I really understand you a bit better than just the words, or can I understand you a bit better than just your body language? Or more importantly, can I understand you better than my interpretation of what you are saying? Because sometimes people don't say things, but we have notions in our heads and we have biases and we have like things that are just working the way they work as a result of how we brought up, or as a result of trauma or some things we've faced in the past, or what we're currently facing. And sometimes a lot of times actually our interpretation of the world is based on that. So even before someone says something, you already have in your mind what you think they said, you know, so it's definitely a principle I try to awake myself to as much as possible.
Nice.
Yeah.
And the last one feels more business oriented, but maybe it's not, is create win-wins.
Create win-wins isn't only business oriented. It's how I like to leave a conversation. It's how I like to leave a situation. I don't want to feel like I just took.
Yeah.
I want to feel like it was balanced.
Mm-hmm.
It's hardly balanced, but if you have that at the back of your mind, you try to make sure that the person feels equally appreciated. You know, if you work in a place and you live there, how do people feel? You know, that's a win-win situation. Win-win isn't always interpreted in the economical sense or monetarily or business-wise. It's also about the encounter that we have in now. When we leave here, how does it feel for us? You know, you have the podcast you've recorded. I'm an artist. You've given me some exposure from your platform. So it's a win-win.
Yeah.
And we've also had like a good interaction till this point. So I want to have more encounters like that where people leave a situation feeling not worse than they were when they met me, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. That's all 5. Do you feel like there's one you would add now with 7 years more experience?
Let me think about it before the end of the podcast. But I must say, pretty impressive that you really went to touch that aspect of.
Yeah, I mean, we're coming up on about 45 minutes, I think. My time is wrong because the Mac crashed. But yeah, is there anything else you want to talk about before we finish up? Anything you're working on, or any artists maybe that you feel are doing something really interesting that you would like to give a shout out to? Anything like that?
I'm working on an EP called Roses now. It's gonna drop in 2024 if you're listening to it then. The first single is gonna come out in January. Next year I'm gonna put out a lot more music. I'm really excited about that. Also planning to have more visuals. I'm gonna have several shows also happening next year. Yeah, just really excited about all of that to come. Want to take this opportunity to shout out everyone who's been a part of my journey, who's been there in one way or the other, either supporting me with a kind word or streaming my music or sharing it to other people, coming for a show, buying merch. Really appreciate you. Yeah, I listen to everything. Sometimes it's gospel, sometimes it's soul, sometimes it's like Afro beats. It's a mix of a lot of different things. So I draw a lot of inspiration from all of that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, if you have a principle, we can stick it in, or we can just leave it at that. And
yeah. I want to come back next year.
Okay, nice. With a 6th principle. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you everyone for listening. Hope you enjoyed. If you can leave us a review, that really helps a lot, both the feedback and the algorithm. And yeah, happy 2024, I guess.
Happy 2024. Thank you for having me on Unsigned Berlin. Truly appreciate.